Good evening, Council President and members of the Council. Suzanne Dale Esty, and I'm the Economic Development Director here at the City. I'm joined by Chris Sorensen, an Assistant Planner, and we're both in the Department of Community and Economic Development. And we are here at your request to briefly highlight the policies that you've established regarding mobile food vendors, and to answer any questions that you may have, and then, of course, if needed, to revisit those policies based on your direction. Just to provide some brief commentary from an economic development perspective, and then Chris is going to walk through the code itself and changes that were recently made. The city has tried to create a welcoming environment for mobile food vendors within our community, but within certain parameters. We recognize that mobile food vendors can add to the vibrancy of our business districts, and we've done quite a bit to try to help them, primarily geared toward helping them use private property within our community. We have established a streamlined process that Chris has really spearheaded. We've helped mobile food vendors secure quite a few sites, and they've been quite active in this community, from large events down at Harley-Davidson to a food truck roundup that was held at Renton Village. And there's quite an emerging scene in the mobile food vendor world. Mobile food vendors, like I said, really can add to a vibrancy of a business district, and they can help us accomplish some of our goals of fostering pedestrian orientation. There are certainly pros and cons, and there are also costs from some perspectives to Main Street businesses. So that's where the policy has to be weighed. And I think with that, I'll let Chris highlight that policy and the changes that were made, and then we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Again, good to meet you or be here before you, council members. Chris Sorensen, Associate Planner with the Planning Division under Chip Vincent. And basically, you know, as far as I can tell, and you can probably tell, we have a growing food cart or food vendor scene. You know, that we've had different events, and a lot of folks have applied for permits that we've been basically allowing them to then function at different properties around a lot of the commercial areas. But tonight I'd just like to share with you kind of when changes were made to our mobile food vending regulations back in 2008, some of the policy that was, you know, before that. But we'll just kick it off with there we go. So basically in 2008 there was a Renton Municipal Code docket item to take a look and review a number of things, produce stands. One of the items in there was to take a look at mobile food vending units. We didn't have a definition. Basically we took the key issues. Vendors were staying at locations permanently. I think that was part of what we were seeing, where these so-called mobile food vendors were just permanently staying at, you know, a gas station or you know, places along Rainier permanently. So it was more of a permanent use. So we wanted to get in and take a look at what regulations could potentially still create a low barrier regulation, but also push these uses towards mobility. Again, there was no definition at that point in time at 2008 for what a mobile food vending unit was, and then what would the permit process look like, or what would the regulations be if we were to create some type of mobile food vending criteria, and who would be allowed in what locations, you know, residential versus commercial, etc. And as far as the right-of-way, or, you know, on street or in parking stalls that are on street, the prior policies before the 2008 regulations were that, you know, mobile food vending units would not be allowed, were not allowed in the street right of way, and that continued to be the same as we went through the changes in 2008. And then in December 2008, Ordinance 5432 was basically where we established the regulations that we're functioning under today. So, you know, just kind of looking at a matrix of, you know, the comparisons of the pre-2008 rules and the current rules. We've talked about creating a definition. One of the keys in the regulations out of 2008 was that a mobile food vendor would have to move each night unless there was some type of special sales where they could stay up to 72 hours at one site. Pre-2008, basically there was a mobile food vending unit was permitted outright in commercial zones and industrial zones. There was a basic review of would this impact parking or getting in and out of a lot. Today we have a permit system under a temporary use permit system, and still in the commercial and industrial zones, it's a pretty quick review. We try to get them out like a lot of permits, within a day or two, but within the week we've got somebody's permit reviewed and out to them so they can start functioning as a mobile food vending unit. Obviously our health license requirements are required for King County and the Seattle Health Department. And then as far as the rules regulating in the right-of-way or sales not in the right-of-way, we've just been consistent with the policies of no vending in the right-of-way. Another thing, the fees, I didn't put it up here. There used to be no fee. Now there's a fee under the temporary use permit. $75 basically would get somebody a review in the commercial zones and the industrial zone. And then as far as maybe a fee for the Wajimaya food truck event, I don't know if anybody went to that in a couple months ago, but that was a special event that was ancillary to the Wajimaya and Renton Village area, so they actually didn't have to come in for permits. When they came in, we just asked, make sure you get a short-term business license and make sure your King County Health Department certificate is up to date and such. So that's basically, comparison of what the rules were before the 2008 changes, what they are today. We were able to have a meeting within Community and Economic Development Department with Neil Watts, who before 2008 used to regulate, or before the creation of CED, would regulate mobile food vending units, and then also had Chip Vincent there, who basically administers the regulations. There's consistency as far as talking about where mobile food vending unit is permitted or not. It has never been where we've permitted them in the right-of-way, just to get that meeting together and have that conversation. So if you have any questions, Suzanne and I are here to answer.
Ms. Breyer.
I have two. First, I wasn't aware that we have a short-term business permit that they can purchase that's not an annual permit.
I believe it's based, I believe there might be one just for a day, but then there's also one that would be allowed if you're not a full-time permanent business. It would be the amount of hours that you're working within the city.
Okay. All right. Great. And then have we had any instances where we've had problems with them being in the right-of-way, or are they usually able to find parking lots and facilities where they can locate? I know we don't have a lot of them yet, but...
Yeah, as far as the ones that I've reviewed for permits that have come in under the temporary use permit, a lot of them are already working with property owners or calling the economic development group to see what property owners might be out there and willing to allow the mobile food vendor to set up there. So I haven't seen anything where we've had issues, and I don't believe code enforcement has really called in our attention to any issues in the right-of-way.
One last question. Do you have any idea of how many we have actively?
I would say 10 to a dozen, but there's a difference between those that are functioning on a daily basis, like Bistro Box, and others might come once a week or twice a week. So, and some of them also function at different properties around town throughout the week.
I want to be clear on one exception to the policies, is that for city-sponsored events, we have allowed some mobile food vendors to park in the right-of-way. And that's generally based on a rationale for that particular event. And that's where there is some staff discretion, and we try to make those judgments based on the special events process and the goals of that particular event, the safety needs, loading, unloading, that sort of thing.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, and Suzanne, on that note, do we allow discretion for these mobile vendors to participate in the right-of-way for special events that are non-city events? Let's say that someone's having a special event in a park or, somewhere else, a public place, space.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think that would be, I haven't seen that situation come up, but I'm guessing the special event permit review that Bonnie Raresich's group and some other team members from city staff, they would probably take that into account if somebody was wanting to bring that in and figure, evaluate whether that could happen or not. I don't know what the decision would be at this point.
Basically, for very few city-sponsored events, we've allowed it. But beyond that, I think Parks has tried to be clear and consistent in not supporting mobile food vendors being in the parks. Terry, if you want to elaborate any further, feel free. But
Terry Higashian from Community Services Administrator. We do get a lot of requests, and I would say there's certainly different levels of food vending. We get from the popsicle, the ice cream, everybody that would love to be able to sell things in the park, and we do control that. And once in a while we'll have a food vendor show up and sell in a park, but we do have that limited because we have contracts with some, like Ivers Kid Valley, to not sell other things in that. So other than that, we work through the Special Events Committee when it's something where a food vendor comes in and does it with an event. And a lot of times it's an RFP process. If there's one type of, if we're seeking just an espresso, then we look for a bid on that.
So with that, and I could understand that applying to Coulon Park because of our contractual agreements, but what about some of our other parks? And specifically what I'm thinking about is that if someone had a family reunion, or they had some other kind of large community gathering, and they wanted to hire, a vendor to come in specifically for that area, and that would, currently it sounds like that would preclude them, if it's not a city event, from parking in the right of way.
If it's a picnic reservation where they've reserved the park for their event, and let's say they're having a barbecue vendor come in and do the food for their event, they just work with us to make sure we have the electrical, the right of way, and all of that, and we can permit that with their
allowable.
With their picnic reservation.
With a picnic reservation.
Yes.
Okay, so the use of a vendor using a right of way to operate is acceptable in concert with a reservation for the public space.
Right, as long as they've coordinated and we've made sure it's a safe environment for the way it's set up.
Okay, and is there any specific prescription to the type? You mentioned that there's multiple levels. Is there any specific language that excludes a specific type of a vendor?
No, as long as they must meet the King County Health License and the King County Health Department. Okay. So, yes. Okay.
Then another question on another note. I remember we had a lot of fun with this. I had a lot of fun with my friend King Parker on this back in 2008. Must be mobile currently. Are we, that's the current rule right now, is that they must be mobile. Is that includes even on private property?
That is correct. Well, there's basically, out of those mobile food vendors before the 2008 regulation, we only have one that's still out there, kind of the grandfathered, which is just north of Arco at Produce Stand. Now anybody coming in to get the permit there would be a condition that's set at the bottom of the permit, that would say you must leave the site between I believe it's midnight and 5 a.m. off the property, and then come back, and that's kind of the condition we use to make sure they are mobile, and then would leave and come back.
Okay. And another thing too that I'm just curious about, because I view this, I've done in fact I looked at a book on the different mobile food vendors across the nation, and they're quite interesting in different communities, well received. Many of them have high quality food, they have loyal customers, they create a lot of energy and vibrancy in certain districts, certain parts of the city, nationally. I'm thinking of places like Los Angeles, Bay Area, New York, Chicago, those kind of places. And I just think of them as an opportunity for economic development for certain types of entrepreneurs. So are we talking to anybody in the mobile vendor industry, learning more about what we could do to be supportive, encouraging, creating more opportunity, as opposed to restrictive in how we're looking at policy in the future?
I'd say, Councilmember Taylor, that we're trying very hard to listen, to defer to the mobile food vendors who have come to our community. Bistro Box, Barb at Bistro Box, has been a real leader and has catalyzed other mobile food vendors to come here. When we have talked with her about private properties. We've asked a lot of questions about what her needs are and not just tried to be prescriptive. We have made sure that our Small Business Development Center is a resource for these mobile food vendors. So I think that we're trying to be welcoming and strategic. Is it a leading marquee initiative in our economic development efforts? No, but we are certainly trying to be supportive and view it as an opportunity.
And I think one of the things as far as creating very low barriers to entry for people, we've got a very cheap permit to turn around on the review for the permit within a couple days. It's not like you're talking about a month before you can figure out if you're going to be allowed to go somewhere. I think that helps somebody be able to make a decision fairly fast whether they're going to locate at a property. And then also in the instance of, let's say, the Wajimaya food truck event, we were able to sit down with the sponsor, Wajimaya, and just say, here's kind of the rules. We're not going to require any permit. We sat down with Bonnie Raresich's team and said, you're not going to have any barriers here. Go forth, and hopefully it turns out to be a great situation. And they actually saw where they had, double digits in additional sales at their Wajimaya store, including the deli on that day. So I think it depends on where these food truck events, one day things are set up, or where the individual food truck is set up. But we're seeing, I think, the Renton rules, we're seeing a growing food truck scene with the regulations that we do have, and we're listening to what other communities are doing and trying to make sure that we're not creating any difficult barriers to start up a business.
Good. That's good. That's important because I think that our restaurant stock, is pretty diverse. This is another mode of food fair in our community, and certainly does have an audience, a population of people who look, for, to do business with our food vendors. Are we aware of anyone else in the region here with us who has a model of how they are treating their food vendors that might be, a little bit different from what we're doing, and with a larger population of business people?
I haven't heard, and we've asked, but we are up for guidance if there's a model out there. In the Puget Sound area, I haven't heard of an example. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback for the time we've spent helping mobile food vendors hook up with private property owners. Clearly, Seattle is embracing this movement more aggressively, and there are, just by nature of order of magnitude, there are a lot more food vendors in that area. There are more dense, walkable environments in that area, and it's become a very hip element of the business districts there. We have also received feedback that the regulation there is challenging, and I'd say one of the policy questions, if there was to be one, and thus far what we've indicated is that the existing policy is working, at least from a staff recommendation standpoint. But one policy consideration would be then to establish more aggressively the use of public right-of-way. That's not a policy recommendation that we're making here today. Right. Seattle has moved toward that. There's a lottery through which in very certain business districts for certain days mobile food vendors can be in certain places, and I parked in a space in South Lake Union recently that was starting at 10 a.m. reserved for a mobile food vendor. So that public good was being given away at that point of time for that particular line of business. Right. That's, again, a policy decision that would be up for your all's discussion. It's not one that we have recommended for this evening.
And I understand that. And the reason that I'm going down this road because we had some pretty vigorous conversations about this, some very good ones too, and I am aware of the competing interest with the brick and mortar, establishments competing with someone who can just pull up right next door and start doing business. I'm inclined to think that there has to be some opportunity for successful coexisting, and maybe at some point in time we might think about right-of-way opportunities if they produce the kind of outcomes that minimizes those types of competing interests that conflict, but yet continue to provide us with the diversity and food opportunities for our residents, especially in a community as diverse as ours. And also, it is a very inexpensive way for one to start a business. So it does have an economic development element there also. So I embrace creativity, innovation, and opportunity to explore and figure it out.
Mr. Corman?
Yeah. Are we talking, when we talk right away, are we also talking food carts, like a hot dog cart,
Go ahead.
popsicle cart, or something like that?
Mobile food vending, you know, we've got a peddler's license that's through Title V, which I'm not as aware of, but we have had hot dog vendors come in, and we have, for the nonprofit groups, they've been allowed, but as far as, from my understanding, talking with Jennifer Henning of the planning division, we haven't allowed like a hot dog cart to be on a sidewalk in downtown, for instance.
Okay. Okay. I guess I don't have a strong opinion, but in fact, a lot of our sidewalks downtown probably aren't broad enough for that. But.
Mr. Person?
Yeah, I think the vending, the people like in the bistro boxes set a standard that I really like. I mean, I'm assuming they're doing a good business in their model, but they're always, I mean, they're professional. And I guess my concern is as we're working through this, I'm happy with what we have, but if we're going to look at expanding it, that we would set some standards, steady type standards for the lack of something else. I mean, my concern with the mobile vendors is they weren't mobile, and they were setting up shop with tents, and you know, we're spending, for example, over $30 million to improve Rainier Avenue to make it attractive for business, as well as, you know, more important, for moving the traffic. But if you're spending $30 million and then you have somebody sitting there with a tent and running a old green garden hose over to for drainage, it just is, I think you're working against what we're trying to improve. But you'd have people who do provide that service, and I agree with Greg that it offers a good opportunity for people to get into the entry market, but not if they're going to be able to set up right in front of somebody who has invested $300,000-400,000 or more in a restaurant, and they're allowed to have a parking place right in front of them. You know, you discourage people to make that investment. So as we go forward, I think we need to be careful about that. I'm willing to look at anything along those lines because it's great. And then all of a sudden, I'm also always concerned about our liability. We put somebody on a sidewalk or in a parking place and they fall off and we've permitted them, then we need to be sure that those people have the proper insurance, so that when they sued the deep pockets, that we're well covered. So I'm happy with what we have now. I haven't heard a big cry to do anything else. I like it when the Return of Renton car show, they had them, and I thought that was great. And just to comment on the parks, I have to agree with Terry. There's a lot of people who want to get an ice chest and throw it in the back of a pickup or a van and go and sell something where there's a lot of people. And I know that'd get us in trouble in a lot of our parks, because it's, especially ones where we have contracts with people who we don't want. I mean, they're paying a lot of money and paying us a lot of money to be in those parks. So we have to really be diligent in that. And I remember when we first started Renton River Days 27 years ago, that the concession stand under the stadium, which was not making any money then, but they had this right. We had to renegotiate. The city wasn't on the council, but the council renegotiated that contract to allow Renton River Days on 1 week, because they had it in their contract. So
That's pretty intense competition during that week.
Yeah, it is. Well, and to their credit, the people that had it used it as an opportunity. They saw an opportunity to get an ice cream wagon out in front of their place and do good. But there again, you run into the problem, and as River Days, especially in the start, we had all these mobile vendors that said, oh, here's about 5,000 people. We'll just kind of move into we're just going to go run down in the park and sell whatever. Well, those vendors that were in the Nibble of Renton paid, and I'm guess I don't know what it is today, but it was about $1,000 permit and all that to get there, and these people are coming in with nothing. Right. So I think that's where I'm coming from on that. That I like what we have now, but I'm willing to look at anything in the future if staff wants to bring it to us.
Okay, we need to wrap this item up and move on to the next one. Any other pressing issues from council?
Not pressing. I'll add later.
Go ahead and thank you guys very much. Appreciate the update. On to our next agenda item, which is the 2013-2014 Community Development Block Grant Funding Recommendations, along with the 2013-2014 Human Services General Fund funding recommendations. Terry Agashiyama is Karen will be leading us. Thank you. Terry, I'm sorry, you didn't have to come up. Karen. That's okay. Very good. Capable hands there for sure.
Absolutely. So tonight we are here for two things. Karen Bergsvik is here and Linda Smith, and they will be doing the presentation. Rob Spire hope to get here, who is our vice chair of our Human Services Advisory Board, and hopefully he'll get here in time to present also. But the block grant is something we do need to get through tonight because it is our federal funding, and the briefing on just the general funding will be part of our budget process. We were here a little while ago talking about our process, and just want to take you through some of the steps and where we are today.
Thank you, Terry, for the reminder too that there will be a public hearing tonight in the regular council meeting. So at the end of the committee of the whole, I'll read a proposed committee report. However, we would not begin to even think about adopting it until after public hearing, but we would like to try to get a committee report out in unfinished business. Karen, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Karen Bergsvik, the Human Services Manager for the City of Renton. With me tonight is Linda Smith, the Chair of the Human Services Advisory Committee for the City of Renton, and Adria Krell is also a member of the Human Service Advisory Committee in the audience, and then Diane Utek is the contract specialist that worked on the funding process as well. We're here tonight to present to you and ask you to adopt the Community Development Block Grant funding recommendations for the 2013 and 2014 years, and as well as the contingency plan for funding. The general fund recommendations will be presented but will be adopted as part of the city's budget process later this year. Our community development block grants are part of the King County Consortium, and King County requires us to adopt them sooner than the budget process, and so that's why we're here tonight. Applications are reviewed to see which agencies and programs best meet the requirements for community development block grants. We have a total of $457,768 of CDBG funding to allocate. Of that, we're recommending $14,000 to the Domestic Abuse Women's Network to provide emergency and transitional housing for homeless domestic violence survivors, $6,000 to Refugee Women's Alliance Case Management and Emergency Program to provide case management to low-income immigrants and refugees, connecting them to services, $25,683 to the Multi-Service Center to provide emergency assistance, and $173,947 to the City of Renton Housing Repair Program to provide health and safety repairs to housing units for low-income homeowners within the Renton city limits. And then finally, $45,777 in planning and administration funds to administer the program. This amount can change depending on what happens in Congress and what they do with the budget. The contingency plan is so that we can adjust the funding recommendations up or down depending on what the final allocation from Congress is. The federal regulations for CDBG require us to do a public hearing as Council President mentioned, so we will be having that at the council meeting tonight. The funding recommendations for CDBG only would be reported out. Do you have any questions about community development block grant funding at this time?
Hear none.
Okay. I'm going to turn the briefing then over to Linda Smith, and as we mentioned, Rob might be joining us if he gets here from work. We have a total of general funds of $469,654 to allocate, and I just wanted to remind you that on February 6th, Linda and Rob and I came to Committee of the Whole and gave you a briefing on the funding process and what we had done to date, and asked for your feedback about the funding process. And at that time, we talked about what we had done to work with agencies to help them be successful. And there were no changes that were requested at that time. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, and good afternoon, Council President and members of the Council. It is indeed an honor to be here this afternoon, and I just want to thank you for your time, your patience, understanding, and most of all, your commitment to the concerns of the citizens of Renton. As you're aware, the Human Service Advisory Committee serves in an advisory capacity to the city in the disposition of human services and allocation of funds to specific programs and projects, and assist in developing policies related to human services affecting Renton residents. The member strives to understand the human service needs of the Renton residents and to keep current on community-wide actions that may affect the availability and quality of human services provisions in Renton. I believe that our board has exemplified due diligence and faithfulness to its call and commission. As you're aware, many of the people in our communities are struggling financially to make ends meet. People are sometimes sacrificing necessary and needed services for basic living resources, and therefore human services programs become more critical and important. The citizens of the city of Renton is no exception. As you know, every community, every city has been impacted by the issue of homelessness, including Renton. And there are many causes to homelessness. And you may be asking the question, what does homelessness have to do with the human service funding presentation that I'm making tonight? And it has everything. And the reason is there's a litany of causes that created homelessness in our community, to include high costs and shortage of housing, poverty, joblessness, education, domestic violence, mental illness, institutional discharge to homelessness, legal issues, access to health care, existing barriers for people of color, and lack of community support. The programs that we funded this year directly impacted and affected each and every one of these causes, therefore impacting the outcomes of the lives of the citizens in Renton positively and transforming ways. So we want to thank you for Council for not cutting our budget this year in these difficult and dire times. We believe through our connection with the citizens of this community and the organizations funded for the human services and work has made a tremendous difference in our community. There are many needs, and we believe, as having been demonstrated in the past, that the programs and resources provided through the support of the Human Services Fund does make a difference and is transforming the lives of the citizens of Renton. Now, the Human Services Board is a dedicated and committed group of community members who really care about the citizens and are invested in the needs of the community. Difficult decisions had to be made this year. I believe that the committee exemplified exceptional professional skills in carrying out these duties. Overall results, a total of 78 applications from 53 agencies, 38 of which had been funded previously. We funded all former agencies and awarded 2011 and 2012 amounts. Our process that we use that had been discussed earlier was, it was more difficult this year due to the increased demand for human services, the number of agencies that applied for the funds, and the magnitude of the financial support requested. Emerging needs of growing diverse communities. The common application process involves 17 other cities. And in preparation for these two processes, two funding workshops were held for agencies in East and South King County. Extensive help available to the agencies were made available with the idea of helping them to better prepare their application. 4 capacity building workshops, including grant writing, as well as individual technical assistance to agencies. The Human Services Board is a highly competitive funding cycle. The funding allocated by Renton results, 9 Renton area results, that's identified in the package that you receive. And the 9 areas are all children and youth are ready for educational success, work and life. Individuals have adequate clothing, food, housing, and health care. All individuals become as self-sufficient as possible. Residents know about domestic violence and how to keep safe. All residents are proactive to issues of sexual assault and sexual violence. All residents are healthy and safe. All residents identify with and contribute to their community in homelessness in Renton and connect people to services. The total funding allocation, $513,113, was divided into soft target allocations for all 9 Renton results based on a community needs assessment. Open and transparent review process was used by the committee. Applications were reviewed and scored by subgroups using a unanimous approving rating tool. Training provided on how to use the rating tool. 4 review groups, each led by an experienced committee member. Each review group rated the applications, ranked them, and made funding allocation recommendations based on common ground rules. Each group then provided an outbrief to the entire committee, summarizing the rating and recommended funding allocations. Questions were addressed and answered. The funding recommendations were combined into a single report and reviewed and discussed by the committee as a whole. Funding allocations were reviewed against the soft targets set for each Renton result, and adjustments were made and approved by the entire committee. So the summary of our results is, I believe that our report is reflective of a committee that was faithful and dedicated to the task before us and its citizens. Our results shows that a total of 78 applications from 53 agencies, 38 of which had been funded previously. 15 new agencies funded, and we funded all former agencies at the amount equal to the 2011 award. So totally, when you look at the results, results 1, all children and youth, educational success, there were a total of 15 applications. 9 were funded. In results 2, individuals having adequate food, clothing and food, there were a total of 17 applications, 13 were funded. Results 3, all individuals becoming as self-sufficient as possible, 10 applications, 7 funded. Results 4, residents know about domestic violence and how to keep safe, total of 9 applications, 7 funded. Results 5, all residents are proactive to issues of sexual assault and sexual violence, total of 1 application, 1 funded. 0 applications for results 6, 0 applications for results 7. Results 8, in homelessness in Renton, total of 9 applications, 9 were funded. Results 9, connected people to resources, a total of 9 applications, 6 funded. I believe that exemplifies our commitment to the process, and that we faithfully followed the process and rated the application, and as a result, that's the results of the work that we had done. One of the things as I close is that in one of Dr. King's speeches, he reminded us that every city community has a moral obligation to not turn its back on its most vulnerable. I believe that through this process, we have been faithful to the citizens of Renton. It's been a pleasure to serve these past couple of years, and I believe that our action over the course of the past year enabled us to be committed to the citizens of Renton. So thank you for listening to me this evening, and I will respond to any questions that you may have.
Questions from council? We're going over information.
If I can just make a comment.
Terry, please.
I just want to thank you and your board for all the hard work that goes into this, because I've been in community services and dealt with you know, some of the applications, and so I do know how much work it is, and I really applaud you for the professional way that you've been working with it and for all the hard work that your commission does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Taylor.
Yes, Linda, I have a question.
Yes.
You guys use that eGov application alliance process.
Yes.
And I've had a chance to look at the scoring application rating tool.
Okay.
Who designed the rating tool? Is all of the cities, all 17 of the cities that use this, are they using the same rating tool?
No, each city develops their own rating tool because each city has different things they're looking for in the funding application.
Okay.
So we agreed on the application that we would all use it, but we don't all use the same rating tool. Each city is unique.
Okay, so the commonality in the application process is the application, but each city designs its own rating tool.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions from council?
Mr. President?
First.
Not a question, but just a thank you. This is not an easy task, and my heartfelt thanks for the hard work that you put into this. And I know in my heart that if you had enough money, if we could give you enough money, you'd fund everybody here. So,
Yeah.
and I think the council would feel the same way. I'm speaking for myself, obviously, but if we had enough money, we'd fund it all. Unfortunately, just in this day and age, there isn't enough to go around. So I just want to say thank you to you and your committee, because I know it's tough, and you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
If I may close on behalf of Community Services, I will say this is probably one of the most unique boards that I get to work with, and we have a lot of them in our department. And while not everyone agrees, and everyone comes with different thoughts and passions and caring about their community, there isn't one person that sits on that committee that doesn't feel just like you do, that if they could fund everything, they certainly would. What certainly helps here is that we do get to see what now people are applying for with other cities. We've never had that before we had the joint application. Now, while we don't know what the cities end up funding each agency at this time, because they're all going through the same process, we can see where they are applying for multiple jurisdictions, and that helps us a little bit also why we're finding out where we can disperse our dollars. And then, of course, we're always reviewing this as the year goes on, because sometimes agencies have things change. Maybe they will change and not need the money, or things will change within their organization. I think a lot of the nonprofits continue to look at ways to work together, and I think that's beneficial versus each one having administrative costs and separate entities, that they'll continue to look for better ways to combine their resources. We've heard that from you several times over the years, and I think they know the better they can coordinate their efforts, the more people we can serve. And finally, the unit costs are a big factor, where we can serve more people at less cost per person. Sometimes that is a deciding factor, but we're trying to serve as many people as we can in our community, because there is no way that we're meeting all the needs that we can. And I again want to applaud this committee and the staff, Diane Utek, who does a lot of work, our home repair staff that is out. You're not seeing here, of course, all of the home repairs that are done. We usually come and do a separate report on our block grant and how many people we're helping stay in their homes just by fixing repairs and keeping them going and fixing windows. And then those that really actually make it out of the cycle and get better. So those measurements are out there, and sometimes we don't see them right away, but they do happen, and part of it is because you give that funding. So we say thank you very much for allowing us to continue doing this work. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Taylor.
Terry, I want to just make a comment. I remember a year ago when we, had our comeuppance and seeing how our new system was working, and you all made some adjustments that I personally, monitored. I was involved in it. You created an opportunity for capacity building. You came up with a budget. You brought in Nate Phillips with South King Council of Human Services, and you did a number of different workshops for training and those kind of things. I really appreciated that. And the reason that I did is because it demonstrated that, first and foremost, you've got a tough job divvying up a small pot of money with a lot of need. All by itself, that's a very difficult thing to do. But then to take on a perspective and to look at how you go about doing that in a way to try to educate our nonprofits, because we all know that many of our nonprofits, they are not going to be able to hire the most qualified candidates for things like grant writing, fundraising, those kind of things. The people that got deep pockets, they can do those things. So you're typically getting people on your boards and on your staff that are good-hearted people. They're loyal, they're dedicated, they want to do the work, but maybe they're lacking, the depth of expertise to really be very competitive, with competing dollars and diminishing resources. So creating that capacity building has made a difference. I would just want you all to continue to, down that path, which I know you're going to do, but being that this is a public meeting, and excuse me, this is a, well, we're going to have a public meeting later at the council meeting, but a committee of the whole meeting for those folks that are looking at this at home, they need to know that, that what we're doing is trying to help our nonprofit agencies perform better and how they pursue their grants, not just for us, but for other organizations, also other agencies that they apply for as well. That's pretty important. That deserves mention, and I wanted to just let you all know that I appreciate that. And you've got a tough job. I know that. And it's very tough. I know that there's a lot of push and pull on your board, and it's not easy. So you guys take a break after this.
Well, I take no credit. I get to work with just amazing people, but I will say we are only as good as the agencies we work with. And the more successful they are, the more successful the public is, and then we get to reap the benefits. So we all win in that case. But thank you for your comments, and thank you for letting us be here tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Chair?
Homer.
Just a process check. This evening we're going to have a public meeting on the I would never get the letters right.
Block grant.
Community Development Block Grant,
Only.
but not the second group that we were just talking about, the Human Services.
That's correct. It will be part of the budget cycle.
Correct. And so we will have a public hearing
Just on the block grant.
tonight, but at a later time we'll have a public hearing. Isn't that right?
There won't be a certainly during the public hearing on the budget hearing.
That's when we...
Yes, then you will have comments, and we usually have quite a few of our agencies that come and
Right,
comment
that's
on
what I
this
was
night.
picturing. Okay.
Yes.
And if council, as you go through, it's an awful lot to digest sitting up here looking at all of this. I've sat with Terry, and she has a notebook that's huge with all the details for every single, or Diane. It was Diane's, that's right. She borrowed it at that meeting. If you want to look back on the details of how they got to the board, advisory board, of how they got to where they were with the recommendations, you could certainly take a look at that information, because it's
Absolutely.
It's complicated. And having been on this committee, I think this is my 9th year, I remember some years back it was not as well laid out and much more subjective, and we got a lot of pushback. So we've come a long way. It may not be perfect, but what I appreciate is we continue to evolve. The advisory board offers us suggestions and is always open to looking at suggestions, and I really appreciate that.
And we get better every time. We only do this every 2 years.
Yeah.
So we sit back and review, so we get better every
Right.
time.
Right.
Thank you.
you all.
Thanks.
Okay, at this point, we do have a public hearing coming up in the regular council meeting. I do have a committee report I'll go ahead and read that they would like us to pass after the public hearing. This is because of federal requirements, so we're moving it along a little quicker than we usually would. We'd usually want to wait a meeting after the public hearing. But there will be some consideration on unfinished business on the following committee report. The 2013-2014 Community Development Block Grant Funding Recommendations. The Committee of the Whole recommends concurrence in the Staff and Human Service Advisory Committee's recommendations to approve the 2013-2014 Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, allocations. The following recommendations for public services are for 2 years, 2013 and 2014, with the second year being contingent upon agency performance and the availability of funds. The allocation of funds will be as listed below. The Community Development Block Grant Public Services is the Domestic Abuse Women's Network, DAWN, for housing, $14,000. Multi-Service Center for Emergency Assistance, $25,683. The Refugee Women's Alliance for Case Management, $6,000. Total of those grants of $45,683. Planning and Administration of $45,777. And a Community Development Block Grant Capital Recommendation for 2013 only for the City of Renton Housing Repair Assistance Program of $173,947. The committee also recommends adoption of the CDBG Contingency Funding Plan as recommended by the HSAC, should the amount of available funding increase or decrease. The committee further authorizes the mayor and city clerk to sign the contract agreements. Again, this will come up in unfinished business. And with that, we're adjourned. Okay.
Provides a great venue for you to see that and to be a part of that.